I wrote 67 thank you cards before my honeymoon. I sat at the small desk in our hotel room the morning after our wedding, while my husband slept, with a cup of coffee going cold beside me and a handwritten list of every person who had come to celebrate with us. I wrote each card by hand. I included something specific, a detail about the gift, a memory from the day, something that would tell the person on the other end that I had not just received what they gave us, but that I had actually seen it and felt it, and was grateful for it in a specific and personal way. I stamped every envelope. I gave them to the front desk to mail before we left for the airport. I did not know, when I was writing those cards, that I had never seen most of the gifts they referenced. I did not know that my mother-in-law Sandra had spent the better part of our wedding reception moving gifts from the venue into her own car. I did not know that she had brought them to her house, where they sat in a spare room for 3 months while she told my husband, quietly, consistently, in the particular way she did everything, that I had shown no interest in acknowledging them, that I had not written a single card, that I had not asked about a single gift, that the people who had come to celebrate our marriage had heard nothing from me and were starting to notice. I did not know any of this until the afternoon my husband came home from his mother's house carrying a cardboard box. Inside were 67 handwritten thank you cards, every one of them opened, every one of them read. Sandra had kept them. This is that story. My name does not matter for this story. What matters is that I was 29 years old. I had just married a man named Thomas, and I had walked into that marriage with the particular optimism of someone who genuinely believed that love and effort and goodwill could soften even the most difficult beginning. Thomas is a good man. I want to say that clearly and early because this story is not about him. He did not know what his mother was doing. When he found out, he was not defensive and he was not dismissive. He sat across from me at our kitchen table with that cardboard box between us, and he looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before, something between devastation and a kind of clarifying fury that was very quiet and very serious. Sandra had always been a particular kind of difficult, not loud, not openly hostile. She operated in the register of implication and omission, the cutting comment framed as concern, the lie delivered as helpfulness, the cruelty disguised so thoroughly as love that you spent more time questioning your own perception than examining hers. From the moment Thomas told her we were engaged, she had positioned me as an outsider, not his partner, not the woman her son had chosen, an interloper who had taken something that belonged to her and did not have the grace or the gratitude to acknowledge it properly. She had spent 2 years building that story before our wedding day. What happened on our wedding day was simply the moment she decided to make it true. Thomas and I had been together for 4 years before we got married. 4 years during which I had tried, consistently, patiently, with genuine effort, to build something real with Sandra. I brought food to family dinners. I remembered birthdays. I asked questions about her life and her history and the stories she liked to tell about Thomas growing up. I drove her to 2 medical appointments when Thomas was traveling for work. I sat with her for 3 hours in a waiting room and brought her tea from the vending machine and did not mention it to anyone because it did not seem like something worth mentioning. None of it was enough. None of it was ever quite right. The food I brought was not what the family usually made. The questions I asked were too personal or not personal enough. The appointments I helped with were noted but reframed. Sandra told Thomas's aunt that I had taken her to the doctor because I did not trust her to go alone. I kept showing up anyway, because Thomas loved his mother and I loved Thomas and I genuinely believed, that consistency would eventually produce something warmer than what we had. Our wedding was 112 people, family and close friends, a venue Thomas and I had chosen together, a ceremony that was personal and specific to us, a reception that I had spent 8 months planning in careful detail because I wanted everyone there to feel seen and celebrated and glad they had come. Sandra arrived early. She positioned herself near the gift table. I did not think anything of it at the time. She was the mother of the groom. Of course she was involved. Of course she was helping. That was what I told myself in the moments I noticed her moving things, organizing things, carrying things to her car during the reception. I told myself she was helping. The gifts did not arrive at our apartment. We had expected them in the weeks following the wedding, the boxes and packages and wrapped items that guests bring or ship when they cannot carry them on the day. Some arrived directly from registries, but the physical gifts from the reception, the ones I had watched people carry in, the ones that had sat beautifully arranged on the table near the entrance, never came. I assumed there had been a mix-up with the venue. I called them twice. They told me the gifts had been collected by a family member on the day and were no longer on the premises. I assumed Sandra had taken them to keep them safe and would bring them when she next visited. I sent her a message asking about them. She said she would look into it. She said she thought Thomas had arranged for them to be picked up. She said she would ask around. She said a lot of things over the following weeks that pointed toward resolution without ever producing it. Meanwhile, the comments began, small ones at first, delivered to Thomas in the casual way of a woman who was simply sharing observations, that her friend Margaret had mentioned not hearing from us, that Thomas's cousin had asked her whether everything was all right because they had not received a note, that people were starting to wonder whether the wedding had perhaps been overwhelming for me and I was struggling to manage the follow-up. Thomas mentioned these things to me gently. I told him I had written and mailed 67 thank you cards before we left for our honeymoon. He believed me. He told his mother. She said she was sure I believed that, but that perhaps I was misremembering. Weddings were stressful, and memory was imperfect, and maybe I had intended to write them and had convinced myself I had. I was not misremembering. I had the list I had written them from. I had the receipt from the hotel for the postage. I had the memory of sitting at that desk with cold coffee and writing every single one. But the cards themselves were gone. The gifts themselves were gone. And slowly, the way these things happen when someone is patient and consistent and has the trust of the people around them, the story Sandra was telling began to take on a shape that was harder and harder to argue against. 3 months after our wedding, I had become, in the narrative Sandra had constructed, a woman who had taken the warmth and generosity of 112 people and responded to it with silence. And then Thomas went to his mother's house to help her move some furniture. He called me from her spare room. I remember the call because of the silence at the beginning of it. He had dialed me and then not spoken for a moment, and in that silence I felt something shift, the particular quality of quiet that precedes information that is going to change something permanently. He said, "I need you to tell me something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." I said, "Of course." He said, "Did you write thank you cards after our wedding?" I said yes, 67 of them, at the hotel desk the morning after. I gave them to the front desk to mail. I have the receipt somewhere if you need it. Another silence. And then he said, "I am standing in my mother's spare room looking at a cardboard box, and inside this box are 67 envelopes, and they have all been opened, and they are all addressed in your handwriting." I sat down on the kitchen floor. He stayed on the phone with me. He read me some of them. The one I had written to his grandmother, which included a specific memory from the ceremony. The one I had written to his college roommate, thanking him for traveling across the country to be there. The one I had written to Margaret, the friend whose silence had been offered as evidence of my ingratitude, which was warm and specific and signed with both our names. Sandra had not just taken the cards before they could be mailed. She had intercepted them at the hotel somehow. Thomas later pieced together that she had called the front desk on the morning we checked out and told them she was collecting items from our room on our behalf, and she had brought them to her house. And she had opened every single one, and she had read them, and she had kept them in a box in her spare room for 3 months while she told anyone who would listen that I had written nothing. She had kept the evidence of her own lie. I want to tell you what I felt in the minutes after Thomas hung up to gather everything and drive home. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be clear about that because I think people expect a moment like this to feel like victory, and it did not feel like that at all. It felt like grief. like the particular sadness of having something you already suspected confirmed in a way that removed all remaining doubt. I had known, for 3 months, that something was wrong. I had known that the story being told about me did not match the person I knew myself to be. I had known that somewhere between my hotel desk and the world's perception of me, something had been intercepted and rearranged. But knowing something and having it confirmed are different experiences. And confirmation, in this case, did not bring relief. It brought the weight of understanding exactly what had been done and exactly how long it had been sustained and exactly how many people had been shaped by it. I sat on my kitchen floor for a while, and then I got up, and I made tea, and I waited for my husband to come home. Because that was what I could do. That was the only thing that made sense. The truth was already in a cardboard box in Thomas's hands. It did not need me to do anything else. It did not need my anger or my vindication or my carefully prepared speech. It just needed to arrive. Thomas walked through the door 40 minutes later. He set the box on the kitchen table. He sat across from me, and for a long time neither of us said anything. Thomas called his mother that evening. I was not in the room for the call. I sat in our bedroom and listened to the low register of his voice through the wall, not the words, just the tone, and I heard in it something that told me the conversation was not going the way Sandra had anticipated. She had an explanation. Of course she had an explanation. She said she had been trying to help, that she had worried the hotel would not mail them properly and had collected them to ensure they were sent correctly, that she had become overwhelmed with a family matter and forgotten about them, that she had intended to sort it out and time had gotten away from her. She did not explain why she had opened them. She did not explain why she had kept them for 3 months while simultaneously telling people I had written nothing. She did not explain the comments to Thomas's cousin or to Margaret or to the aunt who had heard that I was struggling. Thomas listened to all of it, and when she was finished, he said something I only heard secondhand, later, when he told me about the call. He said, "Mom, I read the cards. I read all 67 of them, and I need you to understand that I know exactly what you did, and I know exactly why you did it, and I need some time before I can talk to you again." He hung up. The family fallout was slow, and then all at once the way these things tend to be. Thomas reached out personally to the people Sandra had spoken to, his grandmother, his cousin, Margaret, the others, and he told them what had happened. Not dramatically, not with an agenda, just factually. He told them what he had found, and he let them draw their own conclusions. Margaret called me. She cried. She said she had never believed I would simply ignore people, but that Sandra had been so certain and so consistent that she had not known what to think. I told her it was all right. I told her I understood how it had happened. I sent her the card I had originally written. Thomas had brought the whole box home, and she called me again after she read it. Several family members reached out in the weeks that followed. Some apologized. Some simply reappeared in our lives as if the 3 months of distance had been a weather event that had now passed. A few said nothing and let the silence do what silence does in families. Sandra and Thomas did not speak for 4 months. When they eventually rebuilt a relationship, it was on different terms, quieter, more careful, with a boundary that had not existed before and that Sandra understood, without it ever being stated explicitly, was now permanent. She has never directly apologized to me. She sent a message through Thomas about 6 months later saying she hoped we could find a way forward. I read it. I did not respond right away. I am still deciding what I want to say and whether saying anything serves anyone, including myself. What I know is this. The relationship between Sandra and me changed permanently that evening. Not ended. She is Thomas's mother, and Thomas loves her, and that matters. But changed in a way that gave me something I had not had in 4 years of trying. Space, and the particular peace that comes from no longer needing someone who has shown you clearly who they are to be something different. There are 3 things I want to leave you with from this story. The first is about character as evidence. I wrote those 67 cards because that is who I am. Not because I was building a case. Not because I anticipated needing proof of my own gratitude. I wrote them because my mother raised me to acknowledge generosity specifically and personally, and I have never needed a reason beyond that to do it. The fact that those cards became the evidence that dismantled 3 months of calculated lies was not something I planned. It was simply a consequence of being consistently and quietly myself. Your character, expressed in ordinary moments and ordinary habits, is always producing evidence. Make sure it is the kind you would be comfortable having read aloud in a room full of people who have been told a different story about you. The second is about what happens when you let the truth arrive on its own schedule. There were moments in those 3 months when I wanted to fight, when I wanted to present my hotel receipt and my handwritten list and make the case loudly and immediately for my own innocence. I did not do that, partly because I did not yet have the full picture, and partly because something told me that defending yourself against a story that has not fully collapsed yet only makes you look more desperate and less credible. I stayed quiet and I stayed consistent, and I let Sandra's own carelessness be the thing that ended it. She kept the cards. She kept the evidence. I never had to find it because she stored it herself. The truth does not always need your help to arrive. Sometimes it just needs the villain to make one careless decision. And the third is about what it costs to maintain a lie that large. Sandra spent 3 months managing a deception that required constant maintenance, consistent messaging to multiple people, a believable alternative explanation for every piece of counter-evidence, a relationship with her son built partly on a story about his wife that was not true. That is an enormous amount of energy. And it collapsed in an afternoon when her son walked into the wrong room. The people who build the most elaborate traps are often the ones who forget the simplest thing, that somewhere, in some form, the evidence of what they actually did is sitting in a box waiting to be found. If you are watching this, and you are in the middle of something like this, if someone in your family is telling a story about you that does not match who you know yourself to be, I want you to hear this. Keep being exactly who you are, in the ordinary moments, in the habits that no one is watching, in the thank you cards you write because that is simply what you do, not for the audience, not for the defense, just because that is who you are. The truth about your character is always accumulating somewhere, and the people who are working hardest to obscure it are usually the ones who end up preserving it most completely. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs it today. There is a woman in your life right now who is being told she is something she is not, and who needs to be reminded that the evidence of who she actually is exists in every ordinary thing she has ever done. Hit subscribe so you never miss a story. New videos every week about women who were underestimated, quietly accused, and ultimately vindicated not by fighting back, but by simply being themselves consistently enough that the truth had nowhere left to hide. Leave me a comment. Have you ever had someone in your family tell a story about you that was not true? Have you ever been vindicated by something as simple as your own ordinary habits? Tell me. I read every single one. I will see you in the next one.